I live in one of the most arid cities in the world, one of the hottest, it is the hottest city in the United States. We get about 8 inches of rain a year. That's our expected precipitation. 5 3/4 of them came on this day. And this is what Interstate 10 going through Phoenix looked like on September 9th. It's an unusual event because so much rain came all in one 24-hour period at once. I went to the depth, duration, frequency diagrams. I said, geez, what kind of storm is it that we had? These are the curves that NOAA provides us, and this is where I plot the rainfall from that storm. This is what they mean when they say off the charts. This is what they're referring to. We don't have a depth, duration, frequency curve that goes out to about the 2,000-year return period. So I'm just guessing. I'm sort of extrapolating from the data that NOAA gives me. Now I ask myself, where do we get data on the 2,000-year storm? The only place I know where we can find that is the book of Genesis. That's the kind of storm that we had in Phoenix 2014. And it leads to these headlines where you say, oh, it's once in a million, not once in a century anymore, once in a millennia kind of storm. This was the radar forecast for Arizona just 8-9 days later. And it's the same storm. And that's because once a weather pattern sets up, if it persists, it will continue to generate the same kind of weather. The point of the story from 2014 is things are not as they once were. When we go and make these depth, duration, frequency diagrams, we use historical data and we say, if the future is the way the past was, then this is what we'll expect from the future. But the future is not the way the past was. Nothing now is stationary. We don't have environmental stationarity. We don't have technological stationarity. We don't have social stationarity or economic stationarity. Everything in the future is changing in a way that makes it unpredictable if all we have is the past to base it on. This is a book, The Failure of Risk Management, How to Fix It. It's still optimistic about this paradigm of risk. It says if we just did it right, then we would be able to avoid some of the catastrophes that have happened. This is a different view, one of my favorite authors, on even if we understand the risk paradigm, it will fail us because we will constantly be surprised. But the fact is that these more recent books, they're not entirely new. Perrow gave us this concept of normal accidents way back in the 80s. When we're living in complex socio-technological systems, surprises, and there's going to be bad surprises, are going to happen. So the question is, how's our risk management doing? Can we just do a better job at risk and address these issues of non-stationarity and surprise? I was landing in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. Washington, D.C. got an inch of snow. And this is what Google Maps looked like. Every single interstate is red. That's an inch of snow. And it shut the city down. As it turns out, it was probably a good thing because they were forecast for 30 inches of snow just 3 days later. And they got 30 inches. So I was flying in on this Wednesday, and fortunately, I'm able to take public transportation to my hotel. We have a conference on Thursday. Everybody is trading stories about what a disaster their commute was the night before. By Friday, the entire town was evacuated because that's when the big storm was supposed to start. The experience that they had with the inch of snow was so bad that it was this minor catastrophe of lockup and accidents and property damage, but it prepared them for a much larger storm that could have been disastrous if they hadn't already been motivated by this experience. And I asked this question, how is our risk management paradigm working for us? If it were working for us, then we would be learning from our experience, we would be adapting our behavior and our models, and we would understand how to respond and prepare for these a lot better. Certainly, we figured out what to do with snowstorms, except Washington, D.C. was unprepared for a snowstorm that was even less than Atlanta experienced a year earlier. 3 inches of snow, this is the day after the snowstorm in Atlanta, and the interstate is a parking lot. What I find really interesting about this photo, think about it for a second. Both directions are completely jammed. Where are these people going? It's like this car is doing, I gotta get north, I got it. But this car's like, I gotta be south. They had children sleeping in schools overnight because they couldn't get the children home. 3 inches of snow. This is not supposed to be a catastrophe. The point here is that risk management is failing us. And I'm not saying we abandon it altogether. I'm saying we're unable to respond to what are becoming increasingly normal stressors. So what's the answer? We're back to Phoenix. This is the Phoenix headquarters of the flood control district. And you can see what's happened. They're flooded out. So we've created this fun internet meme. You had one job. The answer is not more risk, because that's what we've been getting for decades. And it didn't used to be this way. It used to be that we understood risk in two different contexts, both as a noun and as a verb. So I went to Google Ngram analysis, which is a really fun tool. And I said, okay, how often does risk appear as a noun and how often does it appear as a verb? And both uses in the English language were about steady, noun dominated, but we still use risk as a verb. Should I risk it? You're coming up to an intersection and the light turns yellow. Do you risk it by driving through? Or do you just slow down and wait for the next green phase? However, in the late 60s, use of the word risk as a noun took off. And it became the official policy of the federal government to objectify risk. That is, to think of risk as something objective that could be scientifically determined and then, in some other value-laden process, managed and minimized. So now we see the dominance of this objectification of risk and how it has overtaken the verb form. But what happens after the dot-com bubble, after 9/11? What happens very recently is the use of the word risk at the time when you would expect people to be more interested in risk than ever has leveled off. So what's going on? If risk management is failing us, the answer we voted is resilience. And resilience is different than risk. We're not talking about risk anymore because inevitably things are going to break down. They are going to fail. Now what we need to do is minimize the adverse consequences of the failure and get things running back as soon as we can. So this is Presidential Policy Directive 21, and it says the official policy of the federal government is to advance the security and resilience of our infrastructure. Well, that's terrific. Wouldn't we like to do that? So what is this resilience that is the answer to the limitations of risk analysis? Well, resilience is also something that shows up in Ngram analysis, and it goes through this long period up to about 1880. The word wasn't used very much in printed English literature at all. But it entered the engineering lexicon as a material property. This material property which, it's not synonymous, but it's like elasticity. This idea that a material which can deform without breaking is resilient. And sure enough, it persists throughout the Industrial Revolution in this material sense until something really funny happens. Resilience also explodes in our printed vocabulary. And that explosion is partly due to and exemplified by this 1973 paper by Buzz Holling, which took resilience out of the engineering context and applied it to ecological systems. This idea that systems are complex and they adapt under stress, and that adaptation in response to stress can cause changes, or it can cause the system, it can be a way that the system persists even under the stress. So we're now talking about resilience, or we're writing about resilience, more than we ever have. And sure enough, after the burst of the internet.com stock bubble, after 9/11, the use of the word resilience took off even as risk was stagnating. So now everybody's talking about resilience. We have the Presidential Policy Directive, we have some other policy directives after that, we have this National Academy's report on disaster resilience, and I've copied for you some of the recommendations from this resilience report. Blue Ribbon National Research Council panel, and what do they tell us? They say, well, we should invest in risk management. We should develop more quantitative risk models. Well, what the heck? If we've got a resilience panel, why are all the recommendations related to risk? And that is, we don't really know what resilience is. We sort of voted, we said resilience is the answer, but here the scientific establishment is lagging behind the policy agenda. We haven't given our policymakers and practitioners enough understanding of how resilience works and what it is for them to put into practice the policy directive. So we got to figure out what resilience is.